So we made the decision that we're going to take 4 games to the other consoles, just 4 games.
On the 16th of February, this discussion was released on the official Xbox YouTube channel. The 20-minute interview had a lot of important information about everything that is upcoming for Xbox. But what really took the spotlight was the fact that Xbox was accepting defeat. After an era of being exclusive, the company has made the decision that 4 of its major games will not be limited to the Xbox anymore. Now, it seems obvious that the 16th of February 2024 will come to be known as the official date when Xbox lost the console wars. But if you've been keeping up with gaming news for a long time, you would know that this was bound to happen. You would know that for the past decade, Xbox has been floundering while Sony has gone from strength to strength. But what if I told you February 16th wasn't the real day Xbox lost the console wars? In fact, Xbox lost the console wars a long time ago. But before we talk about the day the console wars actually ended, we first need to understand how they started. After all, the war between Sony and Microsoft wasn't the first console war. That title belongs to Sega and Nintendo's rivalry during the 1980s and 1990s. While the actual details of that battle are for another video, what we need to focus on right now is how it ended, and how that put Sony into the position they are in today. During 1995, Sega was pushing the Saturn console, and for many good reasons too. At the first E3 in history, Sega talked about how it had the best graphics at the time, and how at the moderate cost of $399, you can get yourself an amazing gaming experience. And that's when Sega dropped a bombshell. The Saturn was already shipped. While the actual launch would be 4 months later in September, 30,000 units were already shipped to 4 big manufacturers. The main idea that Sega was focusing on throughout the talk was the high quality for its relatively low price and easy availability. Surprisingly though, it wasn't Nintendo that Sega ended up competing with. The company that gave Sega the toughest competition was the same reason why they had decided to ship so many units this early on. And that company was Sony Entertainment. Sony's president, Olaf Olafsson, was supposed to discuss how to be successful storytellers in the future. This topic choice was pretty important, considering that it gave him room to talk about how the technological abilities of the PlayStation would work well with the storytellers that come after him. But midway through his talk, something else happened. He decided to go off script and called Stephen Race, the president of the American branch of Sony. And this is when Sony dropped a bombshell of their own. $299.
$299.
That price was all that Stephen Race needed to say, and he walked off stage with a huge applause. And this victory wasn't contained to just E3. Many big distributors cut ties with Sega after they were not chosen to receive the console units in advance, and some of them even promoted the new PlayStation. When the PlayStation finally hit the market, it sold more in 2 days than Sega had sold in 5 months. Seeing Sony's success, Trip Hawkins, the man behind Electronic Arts, or commonly known as EA, commented that, "For a company so new to the industry, I would have hoped that Sony would have made more mistakes by now." And that comment is really telling of how dominantly Sony beat Sega. Sony focused on the same points as Sega, which were high quality and low price. The only difference is that Sony did it better. And in the end, it was this bad launch that drove Sega out of the market, because when no one is buying your console, no one will play your games. And that's where we come back to Sony versus Microsoft and their own console war. While they did compete with Sony in 2001 for market share between Sony's PlayStation 2 and Microsoft's original Xbox, there wasn't much to note during that time. It was Microsoft's first steps into the business, and they wanted to find out if there was space for them in the industry. While the $24 million in sales of the original Xbox as compared to the $151 million in sales of the PlayStation 2 doesn't seem like much, Microsoft was satisfied and began developing a plan on how to get to the top in the next generation of consoles. But let's talk about Sony for a minute. First, we saw how the PlayStation 1 completely dominated the market and pushed Sega out. The PlayStation 2 launch followed the same story, with it completely dominating the market and selling more than 150 million units. Things were going really good for Sony, but maybe too good, because this is when they started getting complacent. On the other hand, Microsoft wasn't complacent at all. After the launch of the Xbox, they put their minds together and correctly predicted where the wind was blowing. During the early 2000s, online gaming was mainly focused around PC with games like Counter-Strike. At the same time, console gaming was more focused on single-player games and couch co-op. Microsoft realized that as time went on and consoles became more common, Couch play just wasn't going to be enough, and there was an untapped market for online play on consoles. Sony, on the other hand, didn't realize any of this. They were just focused on optimizing the PlayStation 2 even more, believing that their great product and the trust in their brand would drive sales like usual. But that's when Microsoft showed the ace up their sleeve and released the Xbox 360 in 2005, 1 whole year before the PlayStation 3 would hit the shelves. And even then, if we don't count the head start that the Xbox 360 had, it was just a better console than the PlayStation 3. For one, it was $200 cheaper, which automatically meant that people were inclined to go for the Xbox more often. For that price, you also got a fully functioning online system, something which Sony had continued to neglect. And if that's not enough, the Xbox also just had a larger library of games at launch. The structure of the Xbox was also easier for a variety of developers to work with, which meant that more external developers could be contacted to make games on the Xbox. On the other hand, the structure of the PlayStation was just too complex, and a lot of developers didn't want to work with them, which just led to many low-effort games that ended up only worsening the situation. Back when Sony had first entered the market in 1996, Jim Wims, the person who led the launch of the first PlayStation, has said that the way they built their market brand was by differentiating themselves and by raising the standard for what makes a good game. Ultimately, that was the same thing that Microsoft did. While both Sony and Microsoft got around 85 million sales, Microsoft's great launch was stuck in the head of the Sony executives for a long time to come. And that's where we come to the actual day when Xbox lost the console wars. No gaming company wants to be left behind and forgotten. Sony first made its way into the market by pushing out Sega, then Microsoft made its way into the market by competing with Sony. And it wasn't a leap to assume that Sony would want to take some of their fans back. And so they did, and they didn't even have to work much for it. It was Microsoft that shot its own self in the foot. One of the most criticized features for the launch of the Xbox One was that you needed to be connected to the internet 24/7 just to play games. Xbox envisioned a cloud-based platform where all the data regarding the user is saved online and can be accessed from any Xbox as long as the person has their details and password. But with this system came one of the biggest restrictions. You couldn't share or replay games on the Xbox One. You would put in your disc, Xbox would then download the game, and then that disc would be completely useless. This way, two people couldn't play using the same disc on two different Xboxes. And that's not even all that was wrong with it. To make this cloud-based function work, you would need to be connected to the internet at all times when you were using your Xbox. And if you had a bad internet connection, well, then there's nothing they can do. And to fully use the Xbox, you needed a Kinect motion sensor, which was made a mandatory purchase whenever you bought an Xbox One. But because of the Kinect's inclusion, the price of the Xbox One was raised to $500, which was $100 more than the selling price of the PlayStation. Doesn't that sound a little familiar? Ultimately, this launch was the complete opposite of the 360 launch. The launch of the 360 was one where Microsoft predicted what was going to be the market situation perfectly. But in the launch of the Xbox One, they weren't even close to the mark. And this level of failure made them the laughingstock of a whole generation, with even Sony joining in on the fun by making this video.
This is how you share your games on PS4.
Thanks.
It was this mistake that ended up killing any hopes that Microsoft had of winning the console wars. This was around the same time that Gen Z was growing up, and the excitement surrounding the PS4 during their formative years is what causes them to still buy PS5s to this day. And once an entire generation fell in love with one of the consoles, there was nothing that Microsoft could do to win them back. And this day, May 21st, 2013, the day the Xbox One was announced, was when Sony truly won the console wars. And that brings us to today. Microsoft has even admitted how far behind they are, mentioning how they only have about 16% of the market share at the time as one of the big reasons on why they should get Activision. And now, they're finally doing away with their exclusivity so that they can see some level of profits. While there are fair grounds to say that Microsoft may be adapting and will stick around for a lot longer, it seems that this could be the end of the line for the Xbox. Well, at least to some. If you want more videos like this, be sure to subscribe and check out the other videos on our channel. Thank you for watching.